We are live on YouTube. And Rocky, I'll get this back to you.
Thanks.
YouTube will be going, or sorry, UGTV will be going live in about a minute. Live on UGTV.
We cannot hear anybody down there. It looks like the 5th floor conference room needs to unmute.
You got it. Are we good now? It's been unmuted.
Yes, we are good now.
A special session is being held on Thursday, October 1st, 2020 for a presentation on street preservation. Immediately following would be an executive session regarding labor. Roll call. McKiernan.
Here.
Ramirez.
Here.
Johnson. Kane. Markley.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Gilbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Townsend. Is Johnson online?
He is online. I saw him.
I'll note that he's present. Alvey.
Here. Thank you. All right, we have a presentation on street preservation. I'll turn it over to Mr. Bach to introduce staff.
Thank you, Mayor. As we've been presenting to the commission over the past couple of years, we went through and did a complete analysis on street preservation, street conditions across our entire community. Our staff has continued to work with this, working through different methodologies that we believe we can bring forward to get more bang for our buck out of our dollars, and methodologies we'd use in the community. So tonight we'd like to present to you a concept we're working with for feedback as we move forward in this direction and look into these to bring forward projects in future to the commission. So with that, I'm going to recognize Troy Shaw, our county engineer. Mr. Fisher is at the hospital with the individual where you heard the page about for one of our employees who's being looked after, and we believe he's going to do well, but he's there with him at this time. So Mr. Shaw is here to start the presentation. Troy?
Thank you, Doug. As Doug said, I'm Troy Shaw, I'm the county engineer. Go ahead and skip my first 4 slides because Doug gave my good introduction. I'm just kidding, you're not getting away with that. But so we've been here, I don't know, multiple times, at least with the standing committee over the last couple of years to talk about pavement preservation and approaches we've taken to improve how we do roads. And there we go. So why are we doing this? I'm sure all of you are aware this is the most recent citizen survey, and pavement or road maintenance, pavement preservation is the top of the list. And we feel as an engineering department that's pavement preservation is very important and appropriate for the citizens to note this way. I think there's a lot of benefits when it relates to economic development and happiness of citizens in general, just to be able to get from one place to the other effectively. So this is very similar, the same last couple of years as well of the surveys. So for those of you that may not be as familiar with this, we have over the past couple of years started doing different applications of treatments. Historically, we've just done a mill and overlay, basically mill off 2 inches asphalt, 2 inches asphalt back. I know at least last year, maybe last couple of years, we've done a micro surfacing in a couple areas as a trial throughout the county. And we have a micro surfacing and a UBOS contract getting ready to go out right now. UBOS is a very thin mill and overlay, basically with a polymer mixed in with it to help it give you a much cheaper, not cheap, it's cheaper than asphalt and it lasts quite a bit, or not as long, but for the life cycle, it does a really good job. So we're going to roll that out this year as well. So we've been taking these steps to help stretch our dollars, help touch the right roads at the right times, not just focus on the ones that are all lagging behind, but try to keep our good roads in good shape. So that's part of the reason we're doing some of these treatments. And on top of that, we've been evaluating another method to see if we can continue to stretch our dollars further. I don't like coming up here and always asking you for money, even though I'll be glad to ask you for money for pavement preservation, because that's what I always need. But the best, we want to do the best job we can is stretching the dollars we do have as far as possible, because we know the money can be used elsewhere as well. So Brandon's going to talk about a method we've kind of talked about that'll help us stretch our dollars and also make large impacts to certain areas of the community all at once and not just focusing on individual street segments at a time. So I'm going to introduce Brandon Grover. He's a project manager with the engineering department to come up and go through that plan.
Thank you, Troy, commissioners. As Troy mentioned, one of the things that we're really looking forward to is stretching our dollars. So the first slide I want to show you here is the last 8 years of our pavement preservation program. It's fairly sporadic, a lot of jumping around to different areas because the method we were using is the worst first method. As we've talked about before, that is not the way to make real improvements in your network by just addressing the oldest roads or the ones that have fallen apart at that time. The proper way to do it is treat the right road at the right time and keep your good roads better longer. This next slide I'm going to skip over and we'll come back to it. It'll be one I'm sure you'll want to talk about, but for this moment, I'm going to skip over real quick. The method that we're talking about going forward with is one called the geographic area clustering method. What we've done is taken the entire city and divided it up by lane miles. And we figured out that 6 areas really gets us the best bang for our buck because of the amount of money we can spend in each area and the amount of lane miles that it gets us to allow to cover. Each year we start doing this with this program or this way we're going about it. We'll be able to address 2 areas. So there'll be a large amount of work going on at one time. And doing it this way allows us to address greater than 20 lane miles of pavement preservation per area per cycle. Whereas right now we're getting about 4 to 6 lane miles in each area that we're moving around. So doing it this way really makes a bigger impact to neighborhoods at one time. There is apparently the slide didn't come up, but there's supposed to be a red box around the first 2 years, 21 and 22, because we're going to be phasing into this. That way we're not leaving anything blank during those couple years. But I just wanted to point that out to you. So when I say what does 20 miles look like, this is 20 miles of mill and overlay. And as we've talked about for the last several years, we're doing other treatments as well. So that 20 miles will actually be larger if we can apply those treatments when they're appropriate. What you're looking at here in the upper left hand is like the Morris area of Turner. Basically everything from 59th Street west and south of Inland Drive down to County Line Road will be addressed at one time. In the middle on the upper, you're talking the northeast area, which is from 5th Street to 11th Street, from Quindaro to Parallel. The larger picture on the right is the northwestern portion of the city. So everything from Markson down to Hollingsworth, from K7 to 123rd. And you got a larger area in the lower portion of that screen that is from basically 78th Street to 94th Street, from State Avenue all the way down to I-70. So you can see really what 20 miles does. And now I'll go back to what this looks like according to this plan, where in 8 years, we'll be able to address every area twice. Could look something like this. You see the large area impacts that we can make in some of these areas. Now, there are several ways for roads to be addressed. One will be this programmed pavement preservation clusters, which we're talking about, which are highlighted in blue. We also are aware that there's going to continue to be the need to address individual roads as they come up, just because if a road fails and we have to close it, it becomes a major inconvenience. So we'll have to do something. Those are kind of highlighted in green. Those are just examples. We'll also have some more emergency repairs that come up that we have to address, and as well as named separate capital improvement projects will continue to go on during this time. We've talked about this a lot so far, but I just wanted to highlight all of these benefits again. You got greater impacts to neighborhoods as a whole. It increases our coordination efforts with utilities, being able to go in and get them out of the way, do the underground work first, put new pavement on it, and hopefully we won't have to be back in those areas doing any kind of major excavation or major inconvenience to citizens for 15 to 20 years. This also will increase the happiness of residents through these areas, because it's not just one street here and there, it's really whole neighborhoods getting done at one time. We've talked about the 20 lane miles. And as I mentioned, currently we're getting 4 to 6 miles per commission district every year, or 12 to 18 every 3 years. Like I said, we'll be able to address greater than 20 miles a year. This also allows us to align our street maintenance activities, patching, striping, curb repairs, that kind of thing. And again, stretches our dollars further. The way we're going to go about selecting these roads is a very scientific way, by taking true pieces of data like the PCI condition, the average daily traffic, the type of treatment that is appropriate for that classification of roadway, and the cost of that application, and the amount of time you're expected to get out of that life. And then you plug it into that formula that's up there on the screen, and it gives you this far right-hand column, the benefit value. What that does is a 0 to 100 scale. So, and what it does is also keeps a running total of how much money each of these areas cost. So if we do have one of those roads that pops up, and we have to put it into this for some reason, we give that 100, we reorder it, and it tells us what roads get kicked out. So we can have that kind of instantaneous feedback of, okay, if we really need to do this one, is it worth sacrificing these 5 other roads, or, things like that. This is a pretty nationally recognized formula for addressing things like these in successful areas that do good pavement preservation. These projects, most everybody knows, in the past couple of years, we've started doing curbs with our projects. That's been a huge push for us. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback on that. Neighborhoods are looking incredible when you drive to them compared to how they've looked. Several areas in Turner received it, and a lot of areas in the Midtown area. This slide is meant to show that while the major portion of these projects is pavement preservation dollars, those other things up here in the upper corner in that little call out box are the other things that get done. So the curb and gutter, the ADA ramps, those are what get taken care of with that concrete fund you guys have so gracefully granted us, which we're super appreciative of that. But we also wanted to highlight that striping and signing budget for a $7.5 million, which is kind of the average that we're getting for the next couple of years to do pavement stuff. That's $175,000 worth of pavement marking. Our current budget every year to maintain pavement marking and signage is only $50,000. That's something we've been tackling for the last couple of years, and we're looking at ways to stretch that even further. But it is something that is worth noting and bringing up because, you know, safety signage and proper striping is a huge issue. Sorry, it's a little bit it's hot standing up all the time. This slide is really meant to highlight kind of where we're at and also show you the numbers that we've been talking about for the last several years. At current funding at that $7.5 million a year, it's going to take us a little bit longer than 48 years to cover our entire network. It's quite a long time. Roads don't last that long, even if you treat them properly. Our PCI score will drop from a 57 to a 43 in 20 years. It won't go much lower than that after that time because our roads will have fallen to a level that just are at the flat part of the bottom of the deterioration curve. But if we allow this to happen, our funding mechanisms to rebuild roads is going to have to grow exponentially because we're going to have no option but to rebuild, rebase roads. And our funding for emergency repairs is going to have to increase as well because as roads fall apart or as major roads have issues, we will have to keep them open. So emergency repairs will have to be done. Now, we've talked for several years now about that $20+ million number. With the data we've got now, we've been able to realize that if we can get up to that, and the sooner we can get up to that, we'll be able to do the entire network in about 18 years. Our PCI score will raise from a 57 to a 74. And it'll stay up at that level as long as we keep the proper maintenance. But once we get to that level, we can then decrease the funding again back down to about $12 to $14 million a year because maintenance costs so much less than rebuilding. That also allows us to get to that payment life cycle of 30 to 35 years, which is about what you can get out of it. The longer it takes to get to that $20+ million line, the more money this is going to take to build things back up. The sooner we can get there, the less it'll cost. And we also want to let you know there's a couple other things that we're doing. With this new methodology, it allows us to do an 8-year pavement preservation program, which will allow us to select our roads, get them out there published on maps, get them out on our pavement preservation website, which we're going to be creating within the next 6 months or so. If you get this presentation, you can click on that link. It's for Phoenix, Arizona. They've got a really good pavement preservation website. It talks about the treatment methods they're going to be using, when they're going to be using, why they use them for certain areas, and all the other kind of data that goes into it. And also next spring in 2021, we're going to be doing another round of data gathering, and we hope to do that every 3 to 4 years, depending on how bad our winters are, just to make sure we're keeping up an accurate representation of our PCI score. Does anybody have any questions?
Commissioner Markley?
Could you go back to that slide that said that one? I'd just like to reiterate here, even if we could come up with $20 million a year, it's still going to take everybody's nodding, everybody saw the same thing, 18 years to get us where we need to be. That's how far behind we are. I know we don't have $20 million in our back pocket. I'm not saying, you know, we don't have that right now, but I just want to reiterate how we need to prioritize this if we're going to get anywhere close to getting our roads back to where they should be. Because even with $20 million a year, it's still going to take us 18 years to get into a decent place. So that's incredible. Those are incredible numbers, scary numbers. And if we don't find any more money, we're just going to continue to fall behind. And that was something that our public very clearly in our last survey said we should be prioritizing. So we just got to keep that in mind as we prioritize what little money we do have to work with.
You said that very eloquently, Commissioner. Thank you. That's the whole point we've been trying to get across for the last couple of years.
Well, and as tough as the funding is, to take the converse of what Commissioner Markley said, if we stay at our current level, we're headed toward gravel roads.
Yes, we are.
So it's really important for us to find a way to prioritize more resources into this area to address the #1 need as brought to us by the survey.
And that's why we've been looking at so many different options for trying to stretch those dollars, because we know how important it is to our citizens. We know how important it is to us living in the community. And we just are kind of handcuffed by that, but we're doing everything we can.
When you go back to the slides where you have the dense areas, that one. So when you're working in an area so densely, it seems like you're almost just constantly going to be encountering road work if you live in that area. Is that a fair statement?
It would appear that way when you think about, if you look at it like this and say, all the things that we've talked about in that slide with the graph, the pavement work, the concrete, all that's going on at the same time, that would be a very fair statement to say that you're encountering it nonstop and it's nothing but a hassle. But by the way we've got it broken out, the green areas that'll usually happen the year before will be some of that utility work that's minimal impact. And we'll get try and get the curbs done and around that time too. That way the next year when we come in and do the pavement stuff, it's very, very quick. If it's a mill and overlay, you've got the road down for less than really 20 minutes at a time while they're milling out and then while they're paving. Several of the other treatments like the micro surface, I believe Commissioner Markley, I think you said it a couple years ago when we did Metropolitan, you went to work one morning and the road wasn't done. You came home and it was. For those treatments, the road's only closed down for about an hour at a time.
It was like magic.
Wow.
So yes, it does look congested and like it could cause issues, but with the way we phase construction in those areas, it's really not as bad as it seems.
So the 6 on that chart, the 6 areas, are they shown on one of your maps?
No, we don't have them on a map yet
Okay.
because we're still kind of tweaking those areas. Like I said, we're trying to do it based on lane miles. So it's, based on some of the older mapping that didn't have things that have recently grown and tweaking some of that, but we haven't put that on a map yet, but it will be on the map that we put out in the coming months for our pavement preservation plan.
It would be interesting if, if there's national data and research that shows when you do care for the roads, improve the curbs, the gutters, when you come back with the street overlay, what that does for land values, assessed values in that area. Because if there's some kind of mechanism then where we might capture that and designate districts, maybe a community improvement district, capture that increased property assessment and pour it back into the program, that might be one way we can do this. So I didn't know if that's anything has been pursued along those lines.
It hasn't been something we've looked at, but I know Robbie has done quite a bit of work on that with all the other neighborhoods up processes you guys have done. So he's done a lot of kind of data gathering and figuring out how to use that information in mapping.
I will say too, we did do it specifically on State Avenue a couple of years ago. Because that was when we had made a significant improvement all the way from east to west. So we did an analysis up and down that corridor and I can't remember the number, but it demonstrated it was 10 or 15% higher in the valuation increases of properties along that than the average in the rest of the community. And, there can be various factors, but it was clearly demonstrated in that.
Because I think one of the things that happens is, so I know that you've done a significant amount of work in Highland Crest. So in that neighborhood, those houses were built after the flood. That's why it's called Highland Crest. And it's 3,000 homes. They average 800 to 1,200 square feet. They're slab on grade. And the curbs, which are just the lazy curbs, have been deteriorating for decades now. It was built in 51, 52. And just the improvements in that neighborhood, I have to assume it makes the neighborhood much more attractive. If there was anything that drew anyone's attention as they drove through those neighborhoods, even if there were some houses that needed repair, some landscaping or whatever, there were a lot of houses that people had put money into. You can get into them affordably at $70,000, $80,000 and put minimum, $20,000, $30,000 into it. But the one disincentive was the condition of the roads. And so I think that probably made a significant difference. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the valuations are going to be like in Highland Crest specifically over the coming years. But I saw Rob out there and I figured if anybody was doing any kind of data search on this, it was Rob.
Yeah, I was going to say that Rob Anderson, Public Works Asset Manager. We've done work and we've referenced work related to when you show investment, public dollar investments, the adjacent real estate increases. So, you know, when I look at this program, I think about the money game related to tax roll. So for me, I think any investment we make in public infrastructure, and the smarter we make it and the more concentrated it is, the broader the impact it's going to potentially be on our revenues. So there's also been talk and consideration, you alluded to at the beginning of your statement, Mr. Mayor, was capturing the delta to reinvest in this program. So, you know, maybe each year we're growing the funding for this mechanism. That's a great policy thing for you all to consider. It's a great point, and I support that.
So I think that's really something we should look at as a potential. Again, as Commissioner Markley, we all can clearly see the money's not in the budget. It's just not there. But it's all about improving the quality of life, putting the right kinds of investments into our neighborhoods, make them more attractive, to drive the values up so that people, first of all, grow wealth, personal wealth in ownership, but also in pride, and it attracts more and more residents. So I think that's a real avenue that we ought to pursue.
To speak to that, ever since we started doing curbs and making some of these larger scale improvements, we're approached constantly by homeowners saying, well, hey, can I get the contractor's information so we can redo our driveway too? Or we've driven through several areas where we see that houses have made drastic improvements to their frontages and everything after we've made these improvements. So it is that societal impact of the city is putting money in my neighborhood. I'm going to make my neighborhood as best as I can too.
To that point, back to the point, you know, there is some research that's a little dated now that shows even litter in streets and on yards decreases the value of homes and neighborhoods. And so those simple things, you know, again, am I proud to bring people into my neighborhood? If I'm not, other people are not going to be proud enough to come in and settle there. And that's a long-term problem we've had to face. But these simple kinds of things to improve the attractiveness of neighborhoods goes a long way to improve the tax base, broaden the tax base, and generate the revenues we need to do the things our residents deserve.
And I'll add to that, just from a personal note, maybe not personal, I don't know, but as with most things that are related to infrastructure, people probably won't notice that your roads and your curbs are good, but when someone drives into a neighborhood and they're bad, that's when people take notice of it, and that's when people don't care about other things when something's already bad to start with. So if we can keep them good, that makes it much easier for a homeowner or an individual to say, hey, I should improve X or Y or Z.
So Mayor, I want to ask you a question. You can stay right up there because you're the one I want to talk to.
All right.
So here's the thing. This is getting really down in the weeds and the curbs. Okay. And that is, let's say that I'm a homeowner in a certain area and the city's not planning on doing any work in that area. That doesn't fall into their area. Is it possible for them, with our permission or guidance, to do the curb edging on their place?
Yeah. So,
you know, who would they contact? How much does that usually cost? Things like that.
So there's a couple different avenues that we've been talking about recently. So we obviously, with the pavement preservation Brandon has been talking about, when we go to an area, we'll look at curb and do replacements that way. The commission and Doug and administrator have given us the ability to start a concrete crew with our own street department, and they can come out and patch small sections. They don't do big long runs, but they will do individuals. They've got a huge backlog of it, so they obviously can't get to it all. And then we also have, you're familiar with the 50/50 sidewalk program. Well, that's also eligible for curbs as well. So John Pack, our right-of-way manager, runs that program. So that funding that is set aside for that is also available to be used for a curb as well.
So if I'm that John Q. Public person, who should I call? Who should I email to
John Pack in Public Works.
John Pack. Okay, that's what I want to know,
Yep.
because I have some folks in my district who they don't necessarily want to wait until it's time for their area to be done. And it's not the whole area. It just may be right along their piece of property.
And that,
The issue.
and I will note online or on camera that funding is limited and it's first come, first served when we have it. And I'd have to check and see how much is either available this year or next year.
Right,
But
well, and
I'm gonna note it.
I
just in case.
understand that, but it's also a question, when we talk to John Pack, can he give them an idea if they decide they want to pay for it themselves?
Yes.
Totally.
Mhm.
Make sure that they're compliant and don't get in trouble for,
Yep. And I think you would just need a right-of-way permit for that. And that would be through John Pack as well.
okay, thank you.
Commissioner Walters?
Thank you. I certainly agree we could spend more on roads, but I do remember in recent years, we've been approached by engineering and we have made commitments to investments in our roads. We bought expensive equipment. We've had presentations on new surfacing techniques that we're going to make all kinds of positive differences in our community. And now we see this, and it seems like none of those investments have really changed the situation. And no one likes to sit here and say, oh, by the way, you've got to triple your investment from 7 million to 20 million, or the world's going to come to an end. We've been cutting the mill levy over the past few years. That seems like a contrarian position to what we're seeing here, that suddenly we have to triple the amount of money we're spending on this particular issue of our budget. So I guess I'm a little skeptical. I'd like to know why some of the investments we've made in the past few years have not seemed to have much effect, and whether there's an alternative to this approach.
Well, we can certainly speak to that. We can speak to it now, because I would say, one, the $20 million number is not a new number for us. Once we went through and did our analysis, this is where we came out and brought this to the commission, that we're going to have to increase our investment in order to keep up. Some of the other investments we'd make, and I think he's talking about the pothole patchers, and you guys can speak to that, that the difference of the amount of lane miles we're able to fill and go through with better jobs throughout the course of the year is how that happens. But that just takes care, that's a different issue, or I guess you guys can explain it. That's a pothole in the street. It doesn't preserve the whole street as to this side of the equation. But do you want to speak to some of those investments that we've put in, guys?
Yeah, specifically for the pothole patcher, what that's allowed, and I would have to get with our street department to figure out exactly how many they've done now versus how much they did before. But what that piece of equipment does do is what they put in the ground will last longer. It's a better product that they're putting in the ground. So instead of patching the same pothole 6 times throughout the winter, they may go out there once and patch it and they're done with it and moving on to another one. So that is definitely a big advantage for them in that. And then related to the potholes, and we're actually working with the street department too, and Robbie's working on this, and Brandon are setting up our Lucity system, which tracks all our work orders through when they do a pothole, and that will tie that to the road asset as well. So we can see when Brandon's laying out his pavement preservation, how many potholes were patched on this road in the last 3 years. Maybe that's a road we need to look at a little more. Maybe the data is not, because the data is a few years behind as we're looking at it, because we don't do it every year. So we can look at it. Well, we've patched 12 potholes on the segment road last year. We should probably go out and look at that one. So we're also using that data to help us look at that and define that as we're looking at it a little bit more. And then as Doug noted with our different treatments, is we've really just started that. It's kind of like everything else in when you start working with infrastructure that takes 20 years or lasts 20 years, you'll see a payoff in 10 years from what you're doing now. So I think that's a long-term solution, and that's the way to go. And that's how the data has been presented and what we found nationally as well.
I would also add just the efficiency of operations that's gone on by doing this. So it's some restructuring that's happened within the department, but also things like the pothole patchers have brought about. So as you all know, last year we've come forward, we told you we were 20 down in the streets department. 10 to 12 of those are over and above where we want to be. 8, I think it was 8 or 9, that Jeff was bringing forward to this year saying, okay, we've vacated these positions. We're holding them out because we're more efficient. We can do this better. Now, he didn't want to double that number because those are positions that are doing work that we're missing out there in the community today. But those 8 or 9 positions, because we're working more efficiently, that's $400,000 or $500,000 a year. So the pothole patcher was a $260,000 one-time investment, versus the annual thing. So those investments are coming back to us immediately and helped us get through things like we're doing currently with the reduced budget, or we'd have been that much more. We would have been in that much dire position of trying to keep up with the work on the streets if we had been down 20 that we had to have back out here. He still wants to get the other ones back into play. So those are things that are coming about from those efficiencies we put in and some of the investments we put on.
On the, one of the other things that this would be a change of is doing it geographically offers a broader picture on our asset management plan as a whole. So between different divisions and working with other utilities, this gives us a window of time to direct efforts and work. So when we go into a neighborhood, we go into it one time and it's done. Right now, if you look back on that historic map, how we were doing it, it looked like buckshot. That was a symptom of our budget levels, but also a symptom of our ability to use data to drive the work. So I would caution to say that it's not just a change in the tools we're using or the amount of money, it's a change in how we're doing business.
Commissioner.
I think this really sounds great, but one thing that I'll just bring up that I think we need to keep in mind, when it's a road here or a road there, it doesn't attract a whole lot of attention. But when it is a broad geographic area that's being addressed, I think it's possible that we may get some communication along the lines of, hey, how come them? What about my neighborhood? So I think it's really important that we have established the long-term plan and that we all communicate early and often about the fact that there is a long-term plan. And here's where your neighborhood fits into that, even though it's not being done this year.
And I think before we do this, this kind of points up again that we have a tremendous number of vacant lots east of 635, which already have the infrastructure. You can't just go in and pave the road in front of the house. You have to pave the whole street. And so, again, we have infrastructure in place without houses on them, without commercial establishments. We have to find a way to continue to rebuild those neighborhoods because the infrastructure is there and the amount of investment up front is much smaller than with to go out to a green field. If we've got the infrastructure in place, we need to make use of it. It's going to give us more yield per acre than just going out to a green field. I had a conversation with a resident who lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. There was one house, and she was the only house on, and demanded that we mill down and replace all the asphalt. And she said, I've been paying her taxes all these years, and I had to remind her, the amount of taxes you paid over the years doesn't pay for this one resurfacing. And it certainly doesn't include all the costs for fire and police and ambulance and sewer. It simply doesn't do that. So we have to keep reminding ourselves that we have areas that we need to reinvest in, bring more housing to. They've already been hollowed out. Let's bring that back because that's going to give us the most revenue per acre.
If anybody wants to have that information in their pocket when you're getting those kind of phone calls, to resurface, which is remove 2 inches and put back 2 inches on a 2-lane road, is about $200,000 a mile. So when people hear that, they think about how many taxes they paid and what percentage of those taxes go towards public works investment. That should really spark something in people to realize that maybe this needs to be a bigger picture item.
Yeah.
Mayor, can I just say something real quick here while I'm trying to drive and I'm on my way down, so please forgive me. I like the fact that you have those, that you've chosen areas in diverse areas of the city. And I would just only say that is important that you continue to do that. To think about talking to persons in what we would consider to be a rational conversation does not really mean a whole lot when they think about or when they hear the constant press about what's going on in certain parts of the cities and what's not going on in other parts of the city. So I would encourage you to continue what you've shown us tonight. I think is the right strategy. And I just want to make sure I double down and say we need to continue to make sure that we are doing things in different parts of the cities of this city at the same time. I think that's going to really work to our favor. So with that, I will be quiet and you'll see me momentarily.
And that is one of the reasons that we chose to look at this in terms of lane miles when we're breaking up these areas, because we do know that some of the downtown areas are a lot more clustered in lane miles. For the same square mile area, you get a lot more lane miles, east of 635 than you do in some of the other areas. That's why when looking at this map geographically, that area that's just above, it's right on the border of District 7 and District 8, that's a big stretch of area, but it's all 2-lane roads, mile sections. But when you get downtown more, you have a lot more neighborhood type areas with a lot more close-knit roadways that take more effort to make impact on.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving us this time.
Mayor, I did just want to note, I think you see the PowerPoint presentation on the snow operations. We were going to deliver this presentation during 7 o'clock meeting tonight. The key staff, along with Jeff, are not going to be here tonight. So you have this information. We'll bring it back another time and present. But since they were taken away, they're not going to come back in for this tonight.
Okay, thank you. All right. Do we have a motion for executive session for consultation with our attorney to discuss matters related to labor?
Yes, Mayor, I move that the commission go into executive session until 7 p.m. to discuss confidential matters regarding the status and future direction of labor negotiations as justified under the Kansas Open Meetings Act under the attorney-client privilege and the employer-employee negotiations exceptions, and that staff designated by the county administrator to be present to participate in the discussion, and that we reconvene in open session at 7 p.m.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call: Markley, McKiernan,
Aye.
Ramirez,
Aye.
Johnson, Markley,
Aye.
Walters,
Aye.
Philbrook,
Aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Burrows,
Aye.
Abbey.
Aye. Aye. Thank you.